I know you've written a number of books. I want to talk about always end with the beginning in mind, and subtitle, How Firms Remain Great After the Founder Exits. This is an important discussion in the legal industry, Don, because the world of buying and selling and acquiring law practices is fairly new. Most lawyers believe they don't really have something that has value beyond themselves. There's a lot of regulation, as you can imagine, as I'm sure there is in the financial services industry, and just regulation, for some odd reason, seems to frighten lawyers. Irony there. So let's talk about putting a book into the world, putting your ideas and thoughts into the world. Takes effort, it takes energy, and it begins with a why. So what is your why behind putting always end with the beginning in mind into the world?
Welcome to the Renegade Lawyer Podcast, the show where we ask the questions, why aren't more lawyers living flourishing lives and inspiring others? And can you really get wealthy while doing only the work you love with people you like? Many lawyers are. Get ready to hear from your host, Ben Glass, the founder of the law firm Ben Glass Law in Fairfax, Virginia, and Great Legal Marketing, an organization that helps good people succeed by coaching, inspiring, and supporting law firm owners. Join us for today's conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Ben Glass. This is the Renegade Lawyer Podcast, where each episode I get to interview people inside or outside the legal profession who are making a ding in the world. Today, I've got a great guest, my good friend, Don White from down in Florida. Don and I have known each other for over a decade. We both served on the board of directors of Love Without Boundaries, which, as many of you know, is an international charity that helps children around the world. Don is a former chairman of that group. He also today serves as a treasurer. A couple of weeks ago, we were hosting Love Without Boundaries here in our training center at Ben Glass Law in Fairfax. So I got to reconnect with Don, and he showed me his new book, Always End with the Beginning in Mind. So let me just give you a little bit of background. Then I'm going to get Don to flesh in the details of his story. Don he's in the financial services industry. He's the founder of Treasure Coast Financial in Stuart, Florida. He eventually sold his interest, which we'll talk about. It's probably part of the genesis for the book. After he exited, his company grew 21%. Don speaks around the world. Literally has given hundreds of talks around the world in the financial services, in the motivational, in the success space. He's an inner circle member of the $1 Million Roundtable, MDRT Foundation, and he is one of the top 2,000 financial advisors worldwide. He has, as do I, adopted children from China, has been very involved in helping lead from the board of directors seat Love Without Boundaries Foundation and helping our founder, Amy Eldridge. So Don, thanks for coming on the podcast today. I can't wait to talk about the book, sir.
Well, I'm excited about being here, Ben, and it's a joy to have this opportunity.
I always like to talk to people about their backstory a bit. You and I, we did go over that a few weeks ago when we were up here over dinner, but they weren't listening. So talk to us a little bit about your journey.
I have a very interesting journey as I see it. I came into the business right out of college. I was very fortunate that I was asked to be a part of the financial services industry. My first job was with a company called New York Life. I actually started in the life insurance business, and I was with them for a few years and was recruited by a company called Pacific Life because I was on the management track. And so one of the things in the management track is you end up bouncing a little bit from company to company. But so I went to work for Pacific Mutual and ran an agency for them down in Fort Lauderdale. I was actually their youngest agency manager at 23. I was such a great manager that 3 years into the job, I got fired because I hired 13 guys, and of the 13 guys, 12 were gone within 2 years. They basically thought, gosh, you're really not good at this. And I really wasn't that good at it, to be honest, Ben. I was not a good recruiter. And unfortunately, I recruited some of the wrong people. But I was fortunate enough to go to work for a company called E.F. Hutton and Company. And E.F. Hutton Company was a financial planning, financial wirehouse back like, Merrill Lynch back in the day. And I was with them, and really, it was just great. I'd still be with E.F. Hutton. Frankly, I probably retired with them. But unfortunately, they went out of business. And so I found myself going to work for another company, and that company was Shearson. And I came to work with Shearson, and the first thing they did is they fired me. And I'm like, what? I mean, this is crazy. They just eliminated our entire office. And I was looking for another job. And so I went to work for a company called for Prudential Beige, it was called. And I went to work for Prudential Beige, and I worked for them for 7 years, did really well. And then all of a sudden they got bought out by a bank. And the first thing they did is they eliminated the steward office. Boom, I got fired again.
Wow.
And so I basically said, okay, well, you know what? This is not good. And so I decided to start my own company in 1995. And so in 1995, I started Treasure Coast Financial, and was fortunate enough that it was a success. And we ran that business for many years, ended up merging with another company in 2016. And then ultimately those guys bought me out in 2020. And now I'm a former large producer of financial services. I'm no longer active in the business at all, which is fine.
Your story about being asked to take over the recruiting and the hiring is an important story because there's something in the world that you're familiar with, I'm sure, called the Peter Principle, is that you can have people that are very good. You obviously were very good at what you did. And then we oftentimes, as business owners, promote them into some sort of managerial or some other position where that's just not their gift and their strength, which is why in my companies at Ben Glass Law and Great Legal Marketing, I meet the new hires on day one after they're hired. I'm completely out of the hiring process because, like you, Don, I'm not very good at it. So and look, well, the other, I think, important part of your background is every seeming adversity opened up a door of opportunity for you, and you took advantage of it. And oftentimes when we're in hard times and maybe changing jobs or occupations or employers or even teammates, like it can seem like it's really hard, but I think sometimes you step back. Over the years, you and I both stepped back from things, looked at like, what is this grand design God has created? Like, it seemed really hard to believe there was something good coming out of this event. But then later you look back and go, well, it's kind of neat. Like, I would not be where I am today had I not had certain adverse events in our lives. Tell us a little bit about the $1 Million Roundtable and how you became not only a speaker, but how you became good at that. I think a lot of people are interested in knowing, how do the guys and gals on stages, how do they get there?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was asked to give a talk when I was first with E.F. Hutton. I was a leading producer, and they asked me to speak. And I gave a talk in Dallas. And one of the guys that was on that stage with me was a fellow by the name of Roger Staubach, who was the former starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, a member of the Hall of Fame and tremendous human being, by the way. And so I was on the stage, and I just was asked to give my kind of my testimony as to what we were doing and why we were successful at E.F. Hutton and so on. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, you have a gift. You could do this. And I said, do what? And he said, you could be you could be a speaker. There's no question. We'd love to have you speak with our group. And I was like, what? And so I just kind of blew him off, if you want to know the truth. In retrospect, I wish I hadn't, because obviously being involved with the Staubach company would have been a pretty interesting opportunity, but I just didn't see it. I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And I was involved with the $1 Million Roundtable, which is an organization, international organization of financial advisors, primarily life insurance. And at any rate, they asked me to do a speech in Toronto back in 1995. And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. And so I gave this talk, and there was a fellow there from Singapore who heard my speech, and he asked me if I would be willing to come to Singapore and speak in Singapore. And that kind of is what got me started. And I realized, wow, maybe I can do this. Maybe there is something more to this. And I spoke with several other folk, and they gave me encouragement. And the next thing I know, I was being invited to speak in Australia, and I was being invited to speak in Europe, and I was being invited to speak all over the U.S. I've been fortunate enough to have spoken in virtually, I think, every state in the United States. I've even spoken in Alaska, and which is hard to believe, but I have. I've spoken there 3 times, actually. But it really is amazing when I think back of all the different opportunities that I've had to share the message. And that's how I view speaking. I view speaking as being an opportunity to share a message, whatever that message happens to be. And hopefully it's a message of hope, a message of encouragement. That's what I'm all about.
It's interesting because oftentimes other people will see things in us that we either can't see or are unwilling to see in ourselves. This Staubach obviously saw something, and you were, I guess, at that point of life where you truly believe that you had that gift or that talent and that interest, but the world is better off because that came to fruition. You've done a lot in the world. You've created 2 audio series, one called Legacy Planning, the other Building a Great Business. And for 20 years, you had a daily radio broadcast, God's Money, heard down in South Florida. And I know you've written a number of books. I want to talk about Always End with the Beginning in Mind, and subtitle, How Firms Remain Great After the Founder Exits. This is an important discussion in the legal industry, Don, because the world of buying and selling and acquiring law practices is fairly new. Most lawyers believe they don't really have something that has value beyond themselves. There's a lot of regulation, as you can imagine, as I'm sure there is in the financial services industry, and just regulation, for some odd reason, seems to frighten lawyers. Irony there. So let's talk about, putting a book into the world, putting your ideas and thoughts into the world takes effort, it takes energy, and it begins with a why. So what is your why behind putting Always End with the Beginning in Mind into the world?
When I was about 40 years of age, I sat down and I said, I need to build a business that people will stand in line to buy. That was always my thought. And so I was about 37 years old when I started Treasure Coast Financial. And when I was about 40, a couple of years into it, I said, I want to build a business that people will stand in line and want to buy. And so that was my intent from day one. And so I tried to build a business that was transferable. It was not dependent upon me. Every one of our clients, for example, I tried to get every one of our clients to understand that you're not dealing with Don White, you're dealing with Treasure Coast Financial, that your advisor is Treasure Coast Financial. It's not Don White. Just like I would say the same thing for an attorney. Your attorney is not Ben Glass, it's the Ben Glass organization. That's what we really want to stress. So that when our clients came and needed something, they didn't have to just look to me. They could look to any of my associates. They could look to any of our staff, and they could get the information they wanted. They could get the results that they wanted. It wasn't dependent upon one person. And the reason that I felt very strongly about that is because I felt that if you had a business that was dependent upon the founder or the advisor or the attorney or whatever, fill in the blank, the practitioner is the proper word, actually. If it was dependent upon the practitioner, you did not have a business at all. You had a practice, and that's different. One of the things I talk about in the book is creating a firm, not a practice. So we have to have a firm. So the firm is what exists. And so I had to prove that I had a business that could stand without me. So I decided, I was given an opportunity to go to Australia in 1997. I'd been in business about 3 years at the time. And 1998, excuse me. And in 1998, I was given the opportunity to go to Australia. And I talked to this agent down there, and he said, look, I can book you as much as you want to get booked. I said, well, just book as many as you can. And so he booked me 28 speaking gigs in 29 days. So that meant I had to be gone for 33 or 4 days, because obviously it takes a couple of days to get there.
Yes, it does.
It's a couple of days to get back and get yourself organized, on time and so on. A 14-hour time difference between Australia and the U.S., or 16, depending upon what time you go. And so it's a pretty significant deal. So I flew over, started working. And the next thing I realized was first couple of days, I was getting a lot of texts and emails and so on from my staff. But then after a couple of days, I realized they were able to do it. And then here's what was remarkable, Ben. I came back from that session of speaking, which was a remarkable experience, by the way. I think it was one of the great things I've ever done in my life. And I tallied up our production as a firm for that month that I was away, a little over a month that I was away. And it was almost exactly equivalent to what we had done in the prior quarter. They had done in a month what we had done in a quarter when I was there. Now, that was a remarkable, there was some circumstances behind that, and I get all that and so forth and so on, and I don't even want to go there. But at the end of the day, I realized that they certainly didn't go backward because I wasn't there. And that was the whole point. Now, what's really funny about this whole entire thing is at that moment, I realized I had a firm. I had associates that could handle what I was doing. It wasn't dependent upon me. My clients did not text me while I was away. That's amazing, isn't it? My clients didn't send me emails and expect me to answer them because I had never instructed our clients to do that. I'd always encouraged our clients to deal with the associates, deal with whoever was there. And they all knew I was going away. I let everybody know right up front that I was going to be gone. I was doing this. And it was amazing how people just realized, they just kind of went over. So when I first sold my company, people asked me, well, did people leave? And the answer was no, they didn't leave. In fact, Stephen and the boys ended up doing, I call them the boys because it's a group of 3 guys that ended up taking over my company. It was 3 guys. And so these 3 guys, who I call the boys, they came in there and they kept on going and they preserved the culture, which was huge to me. And they did all these things that were important in keeping the business alive. And they grew the business. It didn't deplete. It actually went up. And so the first year they grew the company by 21%, right in the middle of COVID, by the way. The next year, in the heart of COVID, they grew it another 20%. So over the course of 2 years, they almost added 50% production after I was gone. And to me, that was a remarkable example of what we were trying to accomplish, which was that this company was not dependent upon me. It was a firm that was existing, that had nothing, was going to defeat it from doing well because of my leaving. My leaving was not going to be a negative to the firm. And that was important to me. And it truly has panned out.
I hope the lawyers are listening to this because this is what Don has just revealed is one of the great mindset unlocks in business, and particularly in professional services businesses, is that, yes, even when it is your name on the door, even when you are the top kahuna, the reality is that we believe, the client only wants to talk to me, only wants to deal with me, and I have to answer all the questions. It's actually not true. Like, they like to talk to team members, presuming now you've built a team, and we'll talk about this in a second, Don, who understand the role they play, understand the culture, understand the mission of the firm. But over and over again, Don, when we have lawyers who we coach give up that position and get their own big ego out of the way for the good of the business, they see results like you have just reported when you got out of the way and let the boys run it. So one of the things you talk about in the book is finding the right successor. And I know that you are big on, and you've mentioned it already here, culture. So as you were, and knowing that you wanted to build a business where there'd be a line outside the door of people wanting to buy it, help us or walk us through some of your thinking as you built the culture and built, we call, right people on the bus, right, sitting in the right seats on the bus. How did you go about that?
Well, first and foremost, you have to understand, Ben, we established a business which was completely unique from day one. And we wanted to create a business which was a Christian financial planning firm, which was totally different than any of my. In fact, I had so many protagonists, when it came to this, right? And so the fact of the matter is that we wanted to do something different. We felt that people who have a faith-based financial planning direction were not getting the kind of advice that they wanted because they were going to people that did not have the same underlying faith and underlying beliefs that they had. So we felt like we could do something different. So we encouraged people who were really strong Christians in particular, people of faith, to come to our firm because we were going to give them an answer from God's perspective. So we just built financial plans around the idea that the Bible has answers for us and financially. And if we adhere to those things, it's going to be successful. It's going to be a good thing. And so it was really interesting. Now, what's fascinating to me, Ben, is that we never budged on this idea. When I first started my radio program, it was called Your Money from God's Perspective. And I quickly changed it to God's Money for two reasons. One, it was a shorter title, but secondly, it was also really more in line with what we were really doing, that it's not our money, it's God's money, and we're just stewards of that money. And so that was our encouraging way of building our business. So we, in fact, built a business where people were looking for financial advisors that were going to give them a biblical perspective on their finances. That's the culture we created. So what happened was, when I decided to kind of move forward on this idea of transitioning out of the business, I was getting people that were trying to buy our business that were not going to keep it the way I had built it. They wanted our business for our book primarily. So we had consolidators that came in, and these are financial wizards of some sort or whatever. These are people that come in and they want to just keep adding firms, and they build and build. And I blew off every one of those guys. I didn't want anything to do with the financial consolidators. Why? Because I knew they were going to blow up our culture. They weren't going to continue to maintain that culture. And they were very clear about it when you would have a conversation with them. And so I chose not to go that route. By the way, they were the highest bidders always. They were the ones offering the most money. Why? Because they had the most money for all intents. So I blew that off. And then I had other competitors that came in, because competitors are going to be your second choice. But none of them understood the culture as well. So I found that I had to build a culture, I had to build people that understood the culture. And I started developing my own people. And I decided that I would create a way for those guys to buy into the company and buy me out of the company without bankrupting themselves. And that was going to be the best win, because it was going to be win for the client. They were going to continue to have the same kind of advice they were always accustomed to. It was going to be win for the advisors that were there, because they weren't going to go bankrupt in paying me off. And it was also going to be win for me, because they were going to give me value for the company. So it had to be all of those things, or it was not going to work.
So one of the important principles as we unpack that is lawyers can often be viewed as a commodity. I'll pick Florida because there's just lots of lawyers in Florida, and they're all right. And I was just in Georgia, I was in Atlanta, and every billboard is a lawyer. And in the financial services industry, right? You can be viewed as a commodity from the outside. And what you did was very smart. You took a particular interest of yours, living the Christian life, Christian stewardship, biblical-based principles, and you said, let's just attract people who already have similar beliefs as we do. So you knew who your who was. And you also understood, while they might not have fully understood what you would come to teach them about money management, investment from a biblical perspective, they at least were already on that path probably. And so being very clear, knowing very clearly who you were for and who you want for in terms of client acquisition was critical. And then I would just point out that carried over in your search for the successor. Very clear idea who your company would be for and who it would not be for. And again, successful outcome, successful transition. So good for you.
Hey guys, this is Ben. If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast, not just the marketing and practice building strategies, but the philosophy of the art of living your best life parts, you should know that my son Brian and I have built a tribe of like-minded lawyers who are living lives of their own design and creating tremendous value for the world within the structure of a law practice. We invite you to join us at the only membership organization for entrepreneurial lawyers that is run by 2 full-time practicing attorneys. Check us out at greatlegalmarketing.com.
Where do you think, so high level of business acumen, Where do you think this comes from, Don, for yourself? I mean, did you grow up in a business family? Is it because of the folks that you ended up helping and shepherding with finances through your long career? Where did your business smarts come from?
I was blessed because very early in my life, I had an incredible pastor. His name was Ray Cohen, a Jewish believer who really gave me a foundation of biblical beliefs and understanding, and just incredible. Then I was also blessed with a mentor when I came to work with E.F. Hutton back in 1985 in my 20s. And his name was Bud Jordan. And Bud was the kind of guy that told you exactly how to run the business, exactly what to do. He was really strong. And one of his key things that he taught me was always do what's in the best interest of the person sitting in front of you, and your business or your interest will always take care of itself. And I've lived my life around that philosophy, and many of the things that we called them Buddhisms back in the day. And these were the things that Bud basically taught all of us. And those principles were just really strong. But while I was working, especially at Prudential Beige, I saw all of these guys, not all, obviously, but I saw many of these people that were there, and all they were doing was just churning accounts. And it was crazy. It was just all about, I got to get more accounts. I got to get more accounts. Got to get more accounts. Got to get more accounts. And they really weren't fully taking advantage of the fact that they had a lot of people that were there that were looking for advice, and they weren't really giving it because they were just trading. I call it churn and burn. And so they were just trying to trade. And I said, man, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to do. And so when I had the opportunity to go out on my own, I looked at it as, I have a whiteboard here, blank sheet. I can do this any way I want. I'm not inhibited by anything. And so I sat down and said, if I were looking for a financial advisor, what would I want that guy to look like? And I said, I would first of all want a guy who had the same beliefs that I did. I'd want to have someone who believed the same things that I believed, as far as principally just fundamental things. And especially my faith is a big part of my life. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try to do something that no one else has ever done. I want to build a practice which is primarily geared to reaching other Christian people like me, of the same fundamental faith that I have, and believe that the scriptures teach certain things which are fundamentally correct about running your business and running your finances and all that kind of stuff. I had just read a book called Business by the Book by Larry Burkett, which was a fascinating book, by the way. I encourage anyone, I may be out of print by now, but who knows. But I would encourage you, if you can find that book, find it. Because Business by the Book really talks about the fact that there are fundamental things in the Bible on how to run a business and how to invest money and so forth. And that was what that book was. It was a huge book for me. And so I took and incorporated many of those things that Larry had talked about in that book as being the way that we run it. Now, what's interesting about this, Ben, is that I thought that 100% of our clients were going to be Christians. And that's not what happened. In fact, probably 30 or 40% of the people, even though we were obviously upfront about our faith, obviously, gave out, this thing, they wanted to do business with us because they saw our business as one of integrity, I guess. And I've had clients, I remember one person in particular down in Boca Raton that I did business with. And I said to her, I says, Jean Ann, you've told me right up front, you don't agree with the fact that I'm a Christian. She said, you're not a Christian as well. She said, no, I'm not a Christian. I said, well, then don't you find it kind of interesting that you're dealing with a Christian firm? So I wouldn't deal with any other firm except yours. And I said, why? And she said, because I know that you believe what you're saying, and that's all I care about. Now, I don't agree with it necessarily, which was weird to me. I don't agree with all these things that you're talking about, Jesus and salvation and all this other kind of stuff. I don't agree with any of that, but I know that what you're saying is fundamentally correct. And so I want to do business with you. And she is still, her and her family are still doing business with my partners. And I find that funny. I really do. I find it absolutely hysterical. But so when I left, I wanted to make sure we always had that culture.
The business lesson there is whether it's Christian principles or conservative principles or whatever it is, when you have principles that you live your own life by, first of all, principles, black and white rules. This is how we do it. This is what we do. It makes decision making easier because now you don't really have to fret too much over what the answer is. And I think people respect and people understand whether it's a politician with principles, my opinion, rare to find, right? They waver wherever the wind goes. But particularly a business person, man or woman, or a firm that operates by principles and is unafraid to announce those principles to the world, and there's something more than just a sign on the wall, right? That has a huge effect, and for our lawyers, a lot of our lawyers, they're in communities, Don, where there's an 800-pound gorilla, right? There's a Morgan, for example, which is a firm you may have heard of, right, in their backyard, and they are not. They are ma and pa, and so one of the things we teach is to not only have principles and live your life by principles, but be unafraid. Whatever your principles are, like whatever your philosophical views are, put them out into the world because you're going to attract somebody, and it's just so much better than just being for everybody, whoever's got a checkbook, churn and burn, right? It's a great tool. Let me ask you about.
I just, on that thought, there was a Bible verse that I adhered to or I had it on my desk. Everybody saw it. And it was something that we really believed and were very strong about. And everybody saw this little plaque. And it said, "For I know whom I have believed, and I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed to him against that day." And it seems like an odd verse to put on your desk, but it was a verse that I felt very strongly about because I am still persuaded that people like to know what you believe. And when you hold fast to the things that you believe, and you're not afraid to let everybody know that, people are attracted to that almost like bees are to nectar. The fact of the matter is that we are given the opportunity every single day to either express what it is that we believe or to deny what it is that we believe. And I think it's much more appropriate to do the former than to do the latter.
And I would plus that and say it's not only in our oral expressions and our print to the world, it's how we live our lives. And so one of my favorites is preach the gospel often and use words if necessary.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about a couple things in the book in the last few minutes here. One, you were big on, and we had a discussion a few weeks ago when you were here, succession versus cessation. The choice is yours. What do you mean by that?
Everybody has the built-in, exit plan, which is a cessation plan. In fact, most people have a cessation plan. What is this? A cessation plan? It just means I'm going to work, and then one day I'm not going to work anymore. I'm just going to close this thing down. I'm going to shut it down, and it's just going to cease. The root of cessation is cease. And so it's just going to cease. And that is the built-in
default
plan that comes, that's automatic. That's the automatic plan. And then there is a succession plan. And a succession plan, the key word there is success, because the root of succession plan is success. And it means that you have gone out of your way to find a way for this business to continue, that we're not going to allow it to cease. We're going to do everything in our in our mindset, everything in our life to keep this thing going. But here's the problem, and I call it the Goldilocks syndrome. And the Goldilocks syndrome is built around this idea that, remember Goldilocks, she went in and she went to the bears and she found the porridge was a little too hot and a little bit too cold. Oh, but then she found one that was just right. And she found the bed that was a little too soft and a little too hard. But it's just right. And we think in our succession plan that we can always just have the right timing, that we can do this thing so it's just right. We're going to sell it at just the right time. It's going to be at the top of the market. It's going to be at the best possible time. But what I have found, Ben, is that you either sell too soon or you do it too late. Those are the only two choices. There is no just right. So what we have to do is figure out what is not too late, because too late is the killer. That is really when you have no value. Most practitioners sell too late. It's just like people get out of the market too late. Everybody gets out of the real estate market too late. Everybody gets out of the stock market too late. It's just because we're afraid to ever sell when things are good. The truth is, when I sold my company, which was at the end of 2019, we had just experienced the best year we had ever had. We weren't going down when I sold. We were still going up. And that was evidenced by, obviously, the fact that the boys continued to grow the company. And by the way, still continue to grow the company. And that I find fascinating. And so when I sit down and I think about cessation versus succession, I have to ask myself, am I willing to let go of the reins before I have to? Before someone else tells me to? Because the truth is, you can either do it by your volition, you can do it by someone else's volition, or you can do it by God's volition. You get taken out, right? So at the end of the day, I want to try to do this as best I can at my volition. And to do that meant I had to do it when things were well, when things were too soon. Did I get out too soon? I think everybody who looks at my situation says, oh my goodness, first of all, you were 63 years old. You certainly didn't have to get out for age. You didn't have any health problems. Absolutely correct. I didn't have any health problems. You didn't have any income problems. You didn't have, there was no, and we always look at it from the wrong perspective. We think getting out, we have to get out because something is wrong. I suggest that you need to get out because everything is right. And that's a totally different perspective.
Well, that's what I really like about the book is that, most books about planning, family planning, business planning, succession planning, all kind of say the same thing. And you come at it with a contrarian view. Or different view. It's not contrarian, but it's a different view. It's your unique view based upon your experience in dealing with lots and lots of biz owners over the years. And so let me end really with a topic that's near and dear to my heart, because you have a section of the book on family succession. And many small businesses and many professional practices, there is, either forced upon or whatever, usually not well thought out, a family succession plan. I'm involved in one now with my son. It's not forced on. We are a great team. And because Mom, Sandy, who you know, and Brian's mom, has blessed like all the deal structure. So if Mom's happy, then we're good. But talk to us a little bit about what owners should be thinking about when the topic of family succession of business comes up.
When I think of familial succession, Ben, the first thing that I always talk about is the fact, is this person the right successor? Is this person the right person? First and foremost is, do they have a desire to do it? Now, that may sound, obvious, but it's not. We sometimes think that, well, I'm the king, I have a prince or a princess, and my prince or my princess is going to ultimately become the king or the queen. That's just the way it is. And they may not feel that way. I have two daughters, as you know. Neither one of them have any interest whatsoever in financial services. None. Zero interest. So for me to wait until they were old enough to be able to come in and take over and so forth would have been a complete waste of time and just wouldn't have worked. So the first question is, are they the right person? And then secondly, do they have a motivation? And so one of the things I talk about is that unless a person has taken on the position of leader before they are the leader, that's one of the real telltales as to whether or not a person is in fact the right choice. Are they a leader before they're forced to be the leader or before they're asked to be the leader? And the easiest person to ask that question to is your staff, the people that are around you, the people that you're close to that are, what do you think of my son? Or what do you think of my daughter? What's the direction? And you got to let those answers be okay. If they give you negative answers, you got to be good with that. And you need to tell them that, hey, this is a confidential between us girls kind of thing. We have to make sure that, we feel very strongly about that. And so, like, for example, when I basically found what I thought was the right successor, the first one I found, my assistant, Kathy, who had been with me forever, said, well, I just want you to know, if you in fact turn the business over to that particular person, I'm gone.
Cool.
And that's a big deal. So the second thing that you want to do is, beyond finding, making sure they have the right motivation and so forth, ask yourself this question. Would I want this person to be my advocate if I went to court? If I needed a lawyer, would I want this person to be my lawyer? Would I want this person to be my advocate? If in financial services, would I want this person investing my money? Forget about everybody. I don't know, my money. And that's a very good question. Would I want this person representing me if my life is suddenly at risk here? Obviously, lawyers, one of the things that you guys do is you represent people that are in trouble. So if I were in trouble, would I want your son to be my representative? Would I be okay with that? If the answer to that is, I don't know, that is a no, by the way.
Yes.
It's a big fat no. And so those are big questions that you need to begin to ask yourself when in familial succession. Is this the right person?
And these are big conversations that you need to have. And again, you made the point earlier, like you can't wait till the end. You can't wait until the slide starts or whatever, or your own health deteriorates or whatever, to start to have these conversations. And I can just tell you, and it probably doesn't surprise you, is that I know a lot of father-mom succession type law firms where I'll talk to someone who's my age cohort in a confidential call. I'll talk to the youngin in a confidential call, and they aren't aligned, and they haven't had any discussions along these lines. And so I confidentially counsel them both. Like, you need to lay the truth on the table for yourself. The question I teach people to ask, Don, is what would be perfect for you? Like, if you haven't thought about that and you can't communicate that to the other, whether it's your spouse, your business partner, or your mom, dad, if that's the case, then you're just missing an opportunity for a crucial conversation.
I tell a story in the book, Ben, about a father who has a son, and that son thinks he's going to take over the business. And then the father just keeps hanging in there and hanging in there and hanging in there and hanging in there. And the truth is, the son gets worn out. And I think it's in the first or second chapter, actually. And the thing that's fascinating about this particular story, because I know the people involved and so on, and I don't know if I talk about this in the book or not, but ultimately the son left. The son actually went in and became this guy's competitor, his father's competitor, which is tragic. And his father had no reason to believe that this was going to happen, but it did. And here's the problem. The problem was the father found his identity in his work.
Yeah.
And his belief was, if I'm no longer doing this, if I'm no longer a lawyer, then what am I? And as though he's not going to be a lawyer anymore, which is absurd. If his son ultimately takes over the day-to-day operation and allows this thing to go and so forth, doesn't mean he can't be of counsel. Doesn't mean that he can't be an emeritus. Doesn't mean that he can't still, participate in certain things. But he has to be willing to pass the crown. And unfortunately, many men and women don't do that. And ultimately, it's not a good result.
What are you doing these days, and because you're still a relatively young guy, like, what is next stage of opportunity for you, do you think?
So as I said in the book, I want to begin with I really want to end with the beginning in mind. What was my beginning? Well, I wanted to teach, and I've always loved teaching. And so I've been blessed with teaching, and I do a tremendous amount of it now. I actually teach at our church twice a week, which is fun. I have been still speaking all around the world. I just came back from speaking over in Europe. I think you and I spoke about that. Prior to that, I was in Singapore doing some work over in Singapore. I'm going to be in Canada on the 17th of September doing a conference up there. I got a conference in Naples I'm still pretty active in the speaking end of the business. and it's fun. I enjoy it. I'm looking forward to doing more and more of that, the truth be known. My golf game has gotten way better. I'm down to a 6 handicap now. So I've been able to focus a little bit more on that. And so I'm doing a lot of the things that I want to do. I'm taking some time away. I'm doing some other things. I mean, I took a month and went to Europe and just hung out with my kids over in Europe for a month as well. So I'm just trying to do the things that I've always felt like were part of who I am and what I'm all about and so forth. I have not slowed down by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to tell you, if you ask me whether Apple was at $150 or $500, I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Well, people ask me all the time, like, you're 65, are you ever thinking about retiring? I tell them I retire from things I don't like to do and people I don't want to be around every single day. But I'm fortunate, like you, like the things that I get to do, but, charity, church, couple businesses, athletics, all that stuff, like I really like doing. Like I actually like the work and the play that I get to do. And if you followed me around for a week, you'd have a hard time differentiating what's work and what's play. Well, look, this has been great. I didn't ask you before, your website, the book is available on Amazon, Always End with the Beginning in Mind, Donald White. Are you looking for people to contact you?
Sure, absolutely. So my website is my name, Donald F. White, like Francis, donaldfwhite.com. Go on there and you can actually listen to my recordings. You can listen to videos. You can see videos. You can order the book on that website. You can obviously do it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of those normal resources as well. And clearly, if someone would love to get in touch with me, they can certainly do that by going on the website or I have a business email now, donaldfwhite@gmail.com. Yeah.
Very good. And I told you the topic for your next book, right? Remember that, a Christian defense of business. That's what we need to work on next.
I really think it's funny because you were talking about that later. I was actually thinking that I would almost like to maybe rewrite Business by the Book by Larry, just to, maybe modernize that a bit.
Well, maybe that's an idea. I don't, the other thing to look at is whether those intellectual property rights are for sale for revision and updating. I mean, there's always a business possibility.
Yeah, you never know.
All right, my friend, I know that you are not busy, but you're busy. And I really appreciate you taking some time today to carve out to share with us some ideas, some really good ideas about how owners of firms should think about succession, finding the right person, maintaining the culture, and doing it so that, as you said, Don, like there's win-win all the way around, client and the players involved in the transition. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
If you like what you just heard on the Renegade Lawyer Podcast, you may be a perfect fit for the great legal marketing community. Law firm owners across the country are becoming heroes to their families and icons in their communities. They've gone renegade by rejecting the status quo of the legal profession so they can deliver high-quality legal services coupled with top-notch customer service to clients who pay, stay, and refer. Learn more at greatlegalmarketing.com. That's greatlegalmarketing.com.